I'd like to start with a story. And to understand this story, you have to know that I am an American. And I was raised in the California suburbs. And like many other teenagers in America, I could not wait until I turned 16. Because 16 was this magical number, this magical age where you get a driver's license. And a driver's license can get you a car, right? And a car can get you so much. Freedom, possibilities to be away from your parents, right? So you can imagine my shock when I moved to Amsterdam over 10 years ago. It was late August, and I was rudely awoken by the sounds of bicycle bells and laughing children. It was 8:30 in the morning, and I peered out my window thinking, what is going on? This was the view that I was looking at. It took me a whole minute to realize what was going on. Why were all these people outside my window? So why was I shocked and also enamored at the same time? Well, this was before I had kids, so I actually didn't even know I lived above a school. It was so embedded in the urban fabric. But I'm also used to this type of school drop-off, right, from my hometown. So this view was a revelation to me. It was a sort of utopia. And this was 10 years ago, and I was convinced at this time that what I was seeing was a direct result of bicycling. I was convinced. And I wanted to know, what was the secret? Why were so many people using bicycles? It was very humbling to discover that this street space looked and felt much different 40 years ago. This was a time in Dutch history where Dutch urban planners and transport planners were embracing auto-mobility. The future was the car. And yes, perhaps the most tangible element of change with these before and after pictures is the fact that there is an absence of vehicles, right? But it's also so much more than that. So after a decade of studying these changes, I have a confession. I was wrong. It wasn't about the bikes. The bikes were just a way to move, to get around, to move from A to B. I was convinced then it was about the streets. Streets in our cities, they're the lifeblood and the arteries of our cities. They also represent about 1/3 of space in cities. And in that way, they're a municipality's largest asset. And when I say streets, though, what does that mean? What does it signify in your brain? What images come to mind? If I said the word phone, you would likely envision something like this, right? You probably wouldn't envision something like this, right? And this is how language works, right? This is called priming and associative memory. These are connected to our cognition, it's connected to our emotions, and it's also connected to our actions and our behaviors. This is the basis of all language and society and how we understand each other. And the great scholar Daniel Kahneman knows so much more about this than I do. But when we take the case of streets, what are we talking about? For the last 100 years or so, humans have been conditioned to associate streets with concepts like movement, mobility, speed, noise, danger. And that paradigm is based on the notion of serving vehicles. Today's city streets offer so much more than those goals from decades prior. We can think of all the different services, the different types of vehicles that we are also seeing here. Right? Our city streets are all stuck in some old Nokia code, right? It's like trying to run your new MacBook Pro on an old Pentium processor. System failure. And when traffic crashes are the #1 cause of death for youth around the world, that is a clear indication that something is wrong. So how can city streets be recoded to better serve our urban communities? I'd like to propose 3 principles for recoding our streets. The first principle is that we need to leverage proximity. We are talking about urban environments here. So this means that the interaction between mobility and accessibility is paramount. Now, in this case, accessibility is not the ease at which we can get to the street or the ease at which we can move on the street. Accessibility in this case is the ease at which we can reach destinations. Right? How easy can we get to goods, services, employment, leisure, recreation? In Amsterdam, what you see here is the close density of these uses in close proximity to where people are living, and this creates walkable and bikeable environments. This is also the concept of the 15-minute city that has been embraced by the city of Paris and numerous other cities thanks to Carlos Moreno. And the 15-minute city offers us this notion that we should be able to reach these types of goods and services within 15 minutes of our home. The implication here for streets is that by looking carefully at adjacent uses and mixed uses, we can more clearly see the patterns of mobility, the demands, and then we can shift behaviors. This example is from the city of Paris. They are experimenting with 35 schools and creating safe areas for schools in the streets next to them. So 35 different schools are creating safe streets for children to play, to walk, and to linger. And what they've seen is an increase in these behaviors. The second principle is to reclaim space. Cities are experiencing severe inequity in the way that street space is allocated and distributed to modes other than cars. If micromobility is ever going to scale up, reallocation and redesign of street space is needed. We saw this during COVID. Almost overnight, hundreds of cities all over the world used social distancing measures as a window of opportunity to create different street spaces and experiment with how they distribute space. They used very inexpensive materials like spray paint and cones. And they also used their volunteers from their neighborhoods and communities to get engaged in this. This phenomenon led me and a colleague to study 55 US cities in their experimentation with new different street designs, and we asked, could these experiments lead to transformative change? What we found was that yes, it did increase these types of behaviors, but actually, and more interestingly, it created new ways of working for cities. They created new partnerships. They created new ways of engaging with their citizens. And most importantly, they were able to reimagine public space, right? Streets as public space. Streets as a common good for communities. This is a paradigm shift. The third principle is to prioritize people. And by people, I mean those who are all too often historically and systematically neglected and underserved in urban planning policies. Those who disproportionately feel the burden of these policies, and most acutely. These are often women, children, people with disabilities, and people of color. If we are to accelerate this shift to sustainable mobility, and if micromobility is to solve anything, it needs to lead with recognizing and also repairing the social and racial injustices our urban systems have encouraged over the last century. Today's city streets need to accomplish many competing goals. They are asked to serve the demands of traffic and movement, right? They are asked to provide efficiency. They are also asked to provide us with access to goods and services, to respond to shifting market demands. And they are asked us to give beauty, identity, and meaning. These three principles show us that our streets have little to do with mobility. And recoding them involves much more than that. Actually, we have enough mobility. To recode our streets means turning upside down the current paradigm. It means embracing discomfort. It also means deeply connecting with our communities and to bravely take actionable steps towards a reality and a whole new language that does not yet exist. Thank you.